Auckland International Airport just raised $1.4 billion from investors as part of a $6.6 billion infrastructure plan. Why its biggest customer, Air New Zealand, was surprised.
Not just Air New Zealand, but all customers are actually a bit up in arms about the scale and the cost of what is getting built.
Speaking of unhappy customers,
our reputation is about flat.
You happy with that or not?
No.
The country's largest airport, Auckland International, has a $6.6 billion infrastructure plan underway. It includes spending $2.2 billion on upgrading the near 50-year-old domestic terminal. It's 23% complete and is set to open by 2029. To help cover the cost, the airport just raised $1.4 billion from investors. Institutional investors ate it up immediately. Investment bankers tell me the money was raised on the market within 3 hours. The airport's chief executive, Carrie Hanganui, says the upgrades are necessary for New Zealand's front doorstep.
We're improving the customer experience, we're building in resilience and really creating the gateway that Auckland and New Zealand needs. The transformation is really important for us. Our customers have told us very clearly that the domestic travel experience is not meeting their needs. And then when we think about infrastructure that's going to take us forward 30, 40 years, we need to be thinking about that now and investing in that so that we have a resilient airport for the future that our customers enjoy and it's meeting their needs.
It's signed an $800 million construction contract with Hawkins, a subsidiary of Downer, to help build it. But airlines, Air New Zealand and Qantas, have slammed the cost of the upgrades, given they will have to partially pay for it through increased landing and takeoff fees. They claim the cost, which they'd add to airfares, will make tourism suffer. When I spoke to Air New Zealand's chief executive Greg Foran after the deal went live, he didn't hide his reaction.
Well, to be honest with you, I think a decision to raise capital is a decision that a company should get on and make, and it's not up to me to get involved in that particular decision. Maybe the one that caught my attention is the contract that was given to Hawkins to do the build. And the reason that one, I guess, catches my eye is that, you know, not just Air New Zealand, but all customers are actually a bit up in arms about the scale and the cost of what is getting built. And, you know, we don't feel that we've got to a point here where we've all agreed on what it is that we're doing. Clearly Auckland Airport do, otherwise they wouldn't have gone and assigned the contract to Hawkins. I don't feel that I'm at a point, and I'm pretty sure most of the other customers who deal with Auckland Airport are in a point where they would say, you know what, I'm happy with the scale of that particular investment. So a little bit disappointed that that's happened, particularly when I feel a lot of this is still actually requiring a bit more dialogue.
But what that contract proved is that they're going ahead with it whether you or other airlines like it or not.
Feels that's exactly what they're doing. Now, you know, we're in the middle of having that backwards and forwards, not just with them, but actually through the Commerce Commission. So, you know, I guess one of the things I've learned over the years is that, you know, you can't please all your customers all the time. I can't please every person who travels on Air New Zealand Madison. I try, but I can't. I do as many as we can, and so do the team. But in this particular case, I actually can't find any customer who's particularly supportive of the scale of the investment. We all want to see improvements at Auckland Airport. No one is holding back and saying, hey, we don't need to spend some money. But maybe instead of $100, maybe it could be $50.
Well, that domestic terminal, I think we can all agree, is in dire need of an upgrade. I came through it on Sunday night. It is, you know, not in great shape. It's very old. Doesn't the investment in that to make it better, which is a better experience for your customers ultimately because you have a large domestic network, isn't that ultimately a good thing for Air New Zealand?
It is. But, you know, I'll give you two components to this answer. One is, you know, I will sometimes end up at someone's house and I might look at it and say, you know what, this is exactly what I want, but I mightn't be able to afford it. So, you know, what you want and actually what you can afford can be two different things. And the same if you want to remodel your house. I'd like to stick an ensuite in every single bedroom, or I'd like, to redo the kitchen and make it twice as big. It's all very interesting until I get the architect's drawings, and then I get it costed out and I go, you know what? I just can't afford that. When they finish building the new domestic terminal, which we all agree requires an upgrade, no one's disputing that. From what I can see, based on the drawings, that domestic terminal is going to have about 20% more retail space than in the current international terminal.
And you think that's a bad thing? Why?
We pay for 90% of that. And I would say to you that when you fly domestically, you tend to get there later to catch your flight than what you do internationally. You're less inclined to go and buy whatever it is, a bag or new shoes or cosmetics or duty free. And you're going to end up with 20% more retail space in the domestic terminal than you currently have in the international terminal. We'll pay for 90% of that build, and ultimately the cost for that sits with you, the customer.
And the revenue earned through retail goes to the airport, not to Air New Zealand.
Well, the revenue earned from the retail actually goes to what they call the second till. So that means it doesn't go to improving the aeronautical assets.
It's the unregulated part of their revenue.
Yeah, so that doesn't go to improving the runway or fixing the gate or doing those sort of things. Now, Auckland Airport is simply doing what many companies would do if you had this regulatory environment, which was actually set in about 1986-87. What I'm asking is, I'm asking the Commerce Commission, I'm asking the Commerce Minister to have a look at the regulatory environment and make it fit for purpose.
We'll scratch the Minister because we don't talk about politics on this show, but just noting the Commerce Commission, they've said an early indication that the plans look appropriate, so you disagree with that?
Yeah, look, they've had a look at a 5-year view because that's what they were charged with doing in this particular price-setting event. When we look at it, and when we don't have access to the full master plan that Auckland Airport are building, yet we will pay for the majority of it, as will all airlines, so we don't have access to that. This is not going to be a $4 to $5 billion spend. What you're going to find over basically the next sort of 15 years, this is going to be closer to $20 billion.
You think it's going to triple from the 4 times the 6.6?
By the time you put in a second airport, and by the time you start adjusting roads, and by the time you start moving fuel tanks and doing all those things, this is not a small spend. And if you only have to talk about this in 5-year increments, then that's a bit of an advantage. If you don't have to share out all your thinking that far out. And if all you need to do is consult with your customer. So no ability for us to get into a negotiation, and if we can't come up with an agreement, some type of arbitration process, which we think would be appropriate, or if you want to, as you do with electricity companies, you could set some sort of price setting event. So there's different ways of doing this, and the countries recognise that when they're dealing with monopolies. I just wonder why that hasn't applied to the main airports.
Speaking of unhappy customers, you've touched on how you can't make everyone happy. We know what happens in the case of reputation being lost in an airline. Don't have to look too far across the ditch to an airline starting with Q to see the impact of that. I'm interested in how Air New Zealand measures loyalty and its reputation. Is it through airpoints and the number of members, or is there another measure, and if so, how does it look?
Yeah, look, we do a number of measures, and it's not just on one thing. We take a customer's, if you like, experience from us from the moment they decide they want to go on a trip to the moment they've completed that and got home, and can break that down to how did they feel about booking with us, and how did they feel about contacting the call centre if they wanted to make a change. What was it like when they turned up at the airport? What was the lounge like? How was the boarding process? What was the flight like? Etc., etc. So we break all of those down and we come up with a customer satisfaction score. And included in that is you can imagine, it then sort of layers up into reputation. So pretty extensive measures, because you're right, our brand is really just so important to everything that we do. So we obsess about it. We obsess about it in terms of how we measure it. We obsess about it in terms of all the softer things that we do, you know, how quickly we respond to people, and you know, how do we you know, deal with particular issues when they arise. I would say to you, it has been the number one thing on my mind since I started.
And do you feel like it's gotten any better since you started, or is it?
Well, I can tell you in terms of how we measure it, our customer satisfaction scores are actually up on where they were in 2019, and our reputation is about flat.
You happy with that or not?
No, of course I want it to be better, always want it to be better. I'd like the customer satisfaction scores even to be better. But I also recognise that we're dealing with some pretty difficult circumstances, some of which are beyond our control. But I also accept that regardless of that, we still have to deliver. So we, as I said, obsess about it.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we're going to stand up and do some more in the components area. Sound good? What does it feel like to run an airline that everyone thinks can run better than you can?
What do you mean by run better than I can?
Everyone has an idea of how they can apparently operate this thing better than you can. The conversations around Air New Zealand are a hot topic almost all the time, whether it's doing well or not. I feel like it's at a fever pitch at the moment, certainly from what I'm hearing from my audience. Do you feel the same way, and how do you feel about receiving feedback from people who think they can do a better job?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I think it's been pretty consistent in the period since I've been at the airline. If you think about it, you know, I started literally on the day that we stopped flying to Shanghai. So, you know, I've had to deal with that 2.5 year period of basically shutting the business down, apart from running COVID and then repatriating Kiwi that wanted to come home. And then, of course, we've had that year of restarting, which was running as hard as you can, trying to get planes out of deserts and restarted. And you may or may not recall that we didn't get a lot of notice as to when the country was going to open up again. But, of course, we had pent-up demand. And then, of course, this last year, we've been cycling into some headwinds. So I would say to you it's been pretty consistent for the 5 years that I've been here, that we're dealing with an issue of some significance, and that continues. It comes with the territory. You know, when I get on an aircraft, which I do pretty regularly, I'll quite often do service and help the crew. And it's often that, you know, people will stop me and say, you know, you take good care of my airline, or have you thought about this, or can you do that? So it goes with the territory. Plenty of good ideas come out of it, not just from customers, but from our crew as well. I got a good one on the flight up to Vancouver last week, which we're working on in terms of how we'll handle and recycle trash on board. So every day you learn something new, and you know, there are parts of it that actually I find pretty engaging, that people care so much about this business, and so they should, because we actually hold a special place in many Kiwis' hearts, don't we?
Greg Foran has been dealing with all the issues at our national carrier for almost 5 years now. When he arrived, he was the Walmart man who knew more about retail than running an airline. Now he's clearly at home in the hangar.
It's a G90, is it?
It was in the first weeks of the job where he had to deal with the pandemic that caused the airline to lose hundreds of millions of dollars and go cap in hand to government for a $900 million loan. It's now paid it all back with interest. Foran wants you to know it's made progress amid all of that, including shifting the organisation to an agile management model and spending millions on new technology upgrades. And there's more he still wants to do.
How long do you see yourself doing this?
As long as the board want me to do it, and as long as I feel I can contribute.
And you feel like you can contribute still now?
Yeah, I think we've made an enormous amount of progress, to be honest with you, Madison, and a lot of the things people don't see, but it's great that you can stand here and you can go, well, gee, that's a pretty significant investment. When you do all of that, that's going to be good. You know, we've done so much work in terms of digitising the business, getting, you know, out of servers, stuff into the cloud, Re-platforming apps, re-platforming loyalty programs, re-platforming call centres. So what we're doing is we're taking really good long-term decisions here to set the organisation up for success. And to be honest with you, now is the time to do it. While it's tough, is exactly the right time to do it. And you know, we've got this way of working in Air New Zealand, agile, and it's delivering us results in a really quick and efficient manner.
Well, that's the thing with airlines. They say that the former leadership sets it up for the next leadership. So your job, you feel now, is teeing this up for success when you are eventually no longer here.
Sure. And I think actually that's the job of any chief executive and board, is to ensure that what you're doing is you're doing what's appropriate for today, but you're also setting it up for success for the future. You know, New Zealand should have an airline, its own flag carrier, I think, for the next 30, 50 years, however long, you know, we think we're going to be flying. I think it's an important part of New Zealand Inc. So let's make sure that we're doing exactly that.
Thanks for your time, Greg.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed it. Air New Zealand's board just signed a retention agreement with Foran, paying him $900,000 a year on top of his salary for 3 years, so he stays with the airline. Thanks for watching Markets with Madison. If you enjoyed this interview, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. I do all of the research for these episodes myself, so your support means a lot. I always love to hear your feedback and ideas, so please drop any thoughts in the comments below. Now go put your money to work.